I'm Kylie McMullan.
And I'm Paul Nixey.
And we're here to do our inaugural taping of PR Today, a new podcast and video cast about public relations.
Yeah, we've launched this new PR series to help offer advice about public relations to small business owners and entrepreneurs.
And, everyone can benefit from public relations, whether it's small business owners, restaurants, bands, authors, entrepreneurs. Pretty much everyone can benefit from public relations. And the nicest thing about it is it's really cost effective.
Yeah, as opposed to advertising, which is really spend heavy. Public relations is a great way to stretch your dollars.
And it can help with the things like media awareness, driving sales, building loyalty. There's really nothing that public relations can't do in terms of getting the word out.
Right. Good. So each week we're going to divide this podcast into two parts. During the first segment, we're going to take a look at a topical issue in the news. So something you may see splashed across the headlines of newspapers or online. And we're going to take a look at it through a public relations lens. So we'll see what people could be doing better and how they're telling their story well and offering some practical tips and advice that you can use.
And then in the second segment, or part of the segment, we're going to be talking about, some real concrete tips, how-tos on how you can use public relations to help your small business. So we're going to be looking at things like internal communications, crisis communications, media relations, when you should hire an agency, how to pick an agency, and pretty much everything under the sun related to public relations and how it can help you help your business.
Great. Let's get started.
So, today on PR Today, we're going to be looking at one of the most topical issues, I would say, this month, which is the Rob Ford scandal. It's kind of insane. I mean, basically, there was a video. For those of you who might not know, there was a video released that 3 journalists saw that showed what is allegedly Rob Ford smoking crack in a crack house. Rob Ford isn't really cooperating with the media to get his side of the story out, and it's just kind of spun from there. Tons of layoffs or firings at City Hall in Toronto, and some resignations, and it feels like the story just will not end.
Yeah, it won't end. It's been going on for a couple of weeks now, and it's turned into a bit of a saga. It's making international headlines. I was recently in Europe, and I turned on the TV in my hotel room, and CNN International top story, Toronto mayor allegedly, crack smoking video. So it's a little embarrassing as Canadians too, I think.
Well, I think that's a really good point. So it's not just a public relations issue for Rob Ford or the City of Toronto. It's really a public relations issue for Canada. I mean, to expand on what you were saying, my uncle is the mayor of St. Catharines, and he was just in China on this mayor's conference, and he said that everyone kept asking him there about it. So not only does it touch, one individual, but it kind of taints, City of Toronto and Canada as a whole as kind of this crack smoking scandalous nations. I mean, even on Jon Stewart, they did a whole skit around Samantha Bee was in Toronto and smoking crack and talked about how all Canadians smoke crack.
Right. I wonder. So Mayor Ford has lost his entire communication staff and replaced them at this point. So he fired his chief of staff and then had a mass resignation of his comms team. So all his in-house public relations left the building. So he's now got an entirely new team of PR people, and it must be a difficult job, I would think.
And I can't imagine, as someone who's worked in public relations, wanting to attach myself to that scandal at all. I mean, I could see myself maybe coming in as a crisis consultant, but I would not want to be putting on my resume, Director of Communications Rob Ford right now.
Yeah, I wonder how if you're Rob Ford, are you even listening to the experts around you, or are you just doing your thing and keeping your head down? He also has his own radio show that he hosts with his brother Doug Ford. Yeah, in which they take their message straight to the people and offer sort of a right wing shock jock kind of message on there. So he's traditionally been adversarial to the media. He's had a terrible relationship, in particular with the Toronto Star. Thinks that they're out to get him because of their reporting at City Hall for the last couple of years.
Didn't he call them a bunch of maggots recently?
Yeah, he really did.
So, I mean, pretty much like, well, Paul, you've been involved a lot in political communications. I mean,
Right.
on a scale of 1 to 10, how's Rob Ford doing?
He's doing it on -6.
Yeah. But it seems to almost be working for him because it doesn't seem like he's lost a lot of support among his core.
This is the thing. So one of the first tenets in media relations for elected officials is that don't kick the media. It's like kicking a skunk. You never win, right?
Yeah.
This is,
What do they say? Don't pick a fight with someone who buys ink by the barrel.
Yeah, that's the quote. So in Rob Ford's case, unfortunately, because he has access to the Ford Nation and his own email list and all this, he has people who just don't believe that this video exists. And it does beg the question, what is the worst thing that could possibly happen in Toronto for this story to stick or to for him to be removed from office, you know, which is proving impossible actually. But it's the big question for Rob Ford's supporters is where is this video? And now that it seems to have vanished into thin air. Along with allegations of violence at a home and a pipe beating that allegedly happened. It's a little scary. So, but he's got this core support that isn't fading.
Yeah.
And what I found interesting is that people aren't. There was a fairly high percentage of people who didn't believe that this video even existed, despite the fact that someone from Gawker and 2 reporters from the Toronto Star had seen it.
Yeah.
So,
and you know, I think it goes a little bit to kind of a trust capital. I mean, if all of a sudden a video about, you know, a more respected mayor came out, I think people might, without having proof or seeing it themselves, might have, you know, some doubt in their mind.
Right.
I think people who don't like Rob Ford believe the video is out there, but for his core supporters, like, I really think they're going to need to see that eyewitness news, and even then they might think it's been, you know, fabricated or I know you can't Photoshop videos, but you know what I mean. Or like, so even if the video does appear, I wonder if they'll believe it even then.
Right. So here's a question. If you are Rob Ford's new incoming director of communications, what's the first piece of advice you give him?
I don't know, because I don't think he would follow it anyway.
Exactly.
I mean, if it was a normal politician, I mean, I think he would. Right now, denial seems to be working with him, so I don't know if he would change tracks at this point. I mean, if it was a normal politician and this came out, you would offer some kind of apology or, you know, some straight talk or transparency.
Apology in rehab.
Yeah, apology in rehab or donations to,
Right.
you know, victims of addiction or something. But with Rob Ford, I mean, he keeps denying, and it seems to be almost, if not working for him, at least not losing him any credibility among his supporters.
Right. Yeah, I can't actually believe he's managed to weather this storm after all the allegations. And in the Globe and Mail article that his family has a history of drug dealing, which is, you know, this is the mayor of Canada's biggest city. It's a big deal.
So what do you think? Predictions, 2-term mayor?
I don't know. I guess it depends who runs against him and
Yeah.
how far down this path they go, right? Because that's another thing to think about when you're presenting an opposition or you're running against someone who's an incumbent. You know, how nasty do you want to get? We recently saw in BC, in our own provincial election, the New Democrats pledged to run a clean campaign, and they did, and they lost. And while the governing BC Liberals ran a campaign with attack ads, which as much as people
Say they don't like them.
they don't like them, we know that they're effective.
Yeah.
People remember the messages that come out in these attack ads. So I think it'll really depend on who runs against them. You know, there have been some really, really high profile names that have been floated, like Olivia Chow might come back. But it depends if the center and the center left and the left in Toronto can come behind one candidate. That might be a...
Well, and that's some of the reasoning I think I've heard before about why Rob Ford was successful in the first place is kind of the center and left split the vote, allowing him to come up the middle. So, I mean, that could definitely happen again. If too many candidates decide that he's, you know, a sitting duck and want to challenge him, he could, you know, because of that core support he has, he could potentially come up the middle.
Yeah, exactly. Plus the amalgamation thing in Toronto. Toronto doesn't vote for Toronto's mayor. Toronto and the suburbs vote for Toronto's mayor.
Yeah.
So it's not like we have here in Vancouver, for example, where it's just the city of Vancouver. But it's it's a much bigger bigger electoral district.
Well, it'll be interesting to see what happens.
Yeah, can he survive the Teflon mayor? Welcome back. We're going to be talking in the second half of our podcast about the biggest question of all: what is public relations?
And this question, actually, it sounds so simple, but it stumps a lot of people, especially people who don't have a marketing background. A lot of people don't actually know what public relations is. I mean, I'm sure Paul and I both have the same issue where when you tell your parents or your cousins or uncles what you do for a living, they have no idea what that means.
I went to a party once and said I worked in public relations, and they were like, "Oh, like a flight attendant?"
Oh, no.
I was like, "No, no."
A flight attendant?
Well, I guess a little bit like a flight
A
attendant.
little bit,
Yeah. But it's amazing to see the different range of what people think PR is. So let's talk about what it is.
Yeah, so I mean, at its most basic level, I think public relations is about building relationships with different publics, which we also call stakeholders. So, you know, whether that be your customers, employees, government officials, you know, first responders in terms of a crisis situation, whatever kind of group might need to know about your company or have a relationship with your company is what public relations is about. Would you agree with that?
I think so, yeah. And I think, you know, we do this through storytelling, and we do this through different channels, but at its heart, that's it. Is you're building relationships with publics, and that's a huge learning for a lot of people, is that it is about relationships. You know, it's in the title, public relations.
And I love how you mentioned storytelling, because that's also a really big part about it. You know, sometimes public relations gets this negative connotation because you know, people say it's spinning, but really I think it's more, you know, helping clients or companies that you work for tell their story to the publics. Just like, you know, a lawyer is hired to like present a case for a client, we're hired to help, you know, tell our person's side of the story, or our client's side of the story.
And oftentimes it's to find what the story is.
That's true.
And then tell it. So, you know, a big part of my day is not the going out and pitching editors and the kind of glamorous high-level stuff of PR, but it's trying to distill what, in fact, the client or the organization I'm working with, what their message is, and what their story really is at its essence. Because a lot of clients think they know what it is and find themselves in a crisis when in fact they don't know what it is.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point. And I think it might be worth also taking a few moments to talk about what public relations is not, because a lot of people, you know, think they have an idea of what public relations is, and then we have to really explain to them or educate our clients or companies what we actually do.
Right. Public relations is not advertising.
Yeah, so advertising is something we also call paid media. So with advertising, basically you're paying money, and for that money you get, you know, 30-second ad or a nice, beautiful ad in a magazine or a newspaper,
or a billboard, or whatever,
on a transit shelter. You know, and it's all very civilized. Money changes hands. You have a contract, and you can put whatever message you want in it. Whereas public relations is very different.
Yeah, public relations is really about telling our stories through these channels. For example, you might read about a new product or service in a magazine, in an article about this new product or service. So we haven't necessarily paid for this content, but it's been written by an editor, it's been vetted by an editor or a journalist, you know, someone who is credible at the publication, and oftentimes we as public relations practitioners are working to provide the best possible light of the product or service to those editors.
And, you know, some people might be wondering at this point, you know, why would you want to do public relations? I mean, advertising seems easy. You pay your money, you get your coverage. It's all very nice. There's no possibility of negative, you know, a negative ad going out, because you get to control the message. So what, you know, when telling someone why they should maybe try to use public relations, what would you say?
Well, for me, there are two things. One is trust. That if you're reading your favorite publication, you generally trust the voice of the journalist or reporter or whoever's written the story. If you buy a magazine, if you buy Time magazine, for example, and someone has worked with a public relations agency to place a story, then you're going to trust that's a credible, authentic story that is verifiable and all of those things. And the second for me is that advertising is on the decline.
Yeah.
Anyone who has a PVR flips past ads.
For sure.
If I'm watching the 6 o'clock news, it's a better value for me to get a story placed in the content, in the editorial content of the news broadcast, than it is to pay, tens of thousands of dollars for an ad that people flip past.
Absolutely. I mean, we're so bombarded with advertising all the time that I think a lot of people just don't even pay attention to it anymore. You kind of, whether you're on Google and there's the Google banner ads, or you're watching TV, or you see a billboard, or you're flipping through a magazine, just it's really hard to break through all that clutter.
Right.
Whereas public relations does, because you want that content. You're consuming that content because you're interested.
Exactly.
And maybe we should talk a little bit about, how public relations can really help stretch promotions budgets.
Right. So I always tell clients that public relations is a slow burn, but when it lights up, it's you can have the equivalent of millions of dollars in ad budgets for on a shoestring budget, really. I work with a nonprofit organization that prior to hiring us had, PR was something they did off the side of their desk, and they didn't have a dedicated strategy. So they invested a very small amount of money into a PR strategy, and all of a sudden they were, getting on the cover of magazines and newspaper articles. And when we measure this, we say that we've provided them with, millions of dollars based on an investment of a couple of $1,000s.
Yeah, I mean, they would probably never be able to afford that kind of placement or that kind of size of coverage.
If they buy it.
If they bought it.
Exactly.
Well, I heard a great quote recently that advertising is the tax you pay for being unremarkable.
Huh. I like it.
Yeah, I know. I mean, I kind of think it gets to the heart of public relations in that, we as PR people really help companies find out what makes them remarkable and then tell that to people who can then spread the word.
Exactly. Yeah, and more and more, we're watching organizations and companies go directly, cutting out the advertising middleman and go directly to tell their story to consumers, which is certainly a trend that I've noticed in the last 5 or 10 years of being in this industry.
For sure. Well, I think that's all we have time for today. So thank you so much for joining us. I hope you choose to join us again.
Yeah.
Next week, we're going to be talking about audiences and key messages. So we hope you tune in next week.
Great. Thanks so much for watching. This is PR Today. I'm Paul Nixey.
And I'm Kylie McMullan.